Question number 4, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he agree with the statement in the Budget Economic and Fiscal update that growth in average income or output per person, i.e. GDP per capita, is what matters for achieving higher material living standards?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I do agree that it's a measure of material living standards. And as I've explained to the member many times, right at the moment, growth in per capita income or per capita GDP is a bit lower because of the surge in population growth. And if the forecasts the Treasury have made come to pass and migration and population growth drop off, then I'm sure he'll be severely disappointed to see per capita incomes growing faster in future years.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
What is the forecast real GDP per capita in Budget 2016 for 2016 and 2017?
The Honourable Bill English.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I don't have that detail to hand, but I imagine it's around 0.6 or 0.7 per year on the basis that there's 2% population growth, which is pretty strong. In fact, about the fastest growing population we've had in many decades, which we regard as a measure of success. That the government is ambitious, New Zealand is a place people want to live and work, and we're certainly achieving that ambition for New Zealand.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is real GDP per capita of less than 1% over the next 2 years going to deliver meaningful higher living standards for New Zealanders?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, and those New Zealanders will have the opportunity to be part of an economy where the population's growing at 2%, which we regard as successful. But they also have the reassurance of knowing that if migration drops off, these numbers will increase.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How is he delivering meaningful gains to New Zealanders' standards of living when real GDP per capita has grown by 0.5%, i.e. less than 1% in the period 2009 to 2015?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not a matter so much of what I'm doing, it's what people are doing by voting with their feet. That is, the 30,000 a year New Zealanders are used to decamp to Australia are staying here, and New Zealand is increasingly seen as a desirable, stable, growing economy, and it's attracting interest from all around the world from people who want to turn up here. We regard that as a good thing.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Minister, if $11 billion in the government's words are required for defence over the next 10 years, where was that accounted for in his last budget projections?
Well, I just can't see how that question... Can I have the question read again, because it's quite a deviation from the original?
They're about forecasts, sir.
No, let's have the question.
Yeah, my question is, if in the government's words $11 billion will be required on defence spending over the next decade, where was any of that accounted for in the last budget projections?
The Honourable Bill English.
Oh, well, Mr. Speaker, the member can be reassured that it is in the budget. It is in the budget, although not set out in quite the way that matches that description. Defence have a long-term funding track for the first time ever. It's leading to a much more efficient and focused defence force, and each year they get roughly a $100 million increase in their baseline. Over 10 years, that's roughly about, that roughly adds up to a lot of money.
A lot of money. Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why, in the face of such poor per capita GDP, did he deliver a budget that, in the words of the Westpac economist team, has a net reduction in the allowances for new operational and capital spending over the next 4 years?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the Westpac people are talking about, frankly, in relation to a net reduction because, as the Finance Minister, I can tell you all the numbers are going up. Some of them a bit faster than might be absolutely ideal from a Finance Minister's point of view. But, Mr Speaker, I don't know how many times I have to explain to the member the low per capita income is a function of the surge in population growth. We regard the surge in population growth as a problem as a success, not actually a problem, as success. This is what we want to see. 30,000 New Zealanders who used to go to Australia staying home. Now, under a Labor Greens coalition, I'm sure they all will pick up sticks and leave, and we'll get a short-term...
Order. That part's not going to help the order of this House. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why has he presented a budget described as, quote, a fiscal mirage by Westpac and as, quote, breathtakingly visionless by Bill, when what New Zealand needed was a budget that actually invests in New Zealand's future?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I simply disagree with both of them. Neither Burl nor Westpac set government policy, and in this case, they also happen to be wrong.
Question